she would keep that for the pictures.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. The audit committee meeting is called to order. It's 3:30, September 13th, 2022. Councilman Shade, would you be so kind to lead us in an invocation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Almighty God, watch over your servants as we meet today and every day to do the will of the citizens of the city of Charleston. In your name we pray, amen.
All right, thank you, Councilman Shade. First item on the agenda is approval of the August 17th, 2021 minutes.
Move for approval.
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, I'll signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The next item on the agenda is our CFO, Amy Wharton, will be introducing Mr. Miller Edwards, CPA, shareholder with Malden and Jenkins LLC. Amy, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to thank Mr. Miller for their great work on the audit, and my staff, who is really, okay, you all know, is absolutely fantastic. And this is Miller Edwards to present the audit.
Well, good afternoon. I appreciate y'all having me here this afternoon very much. As Amy said, I'm here to present to you the 12/31/21 audit, the results thereof. Of course, anytime while I'm talking to you, if you've got any questions, please feel free to interrupt unless your protocol says otherwise. There's been several deliverables that I believe have been delivered. I can see that of the rubber band right there. One of those is we call the annual comprehensive financial report. That has your audited information in it. It's also very well written. It's got a lot of statistical information and other kind of supplementary information that you don't have to have as part of an audit. That's included as well. You've also got a single audit that I'll touch on and management points, those kind of things, which we didn't have anything to cite this year. So that was a great thing. All right. I've been told to point backwards. Or I can just say next. It went, okay. I'm gonna keep on advancing. A little bit about the firm, in case you don't know, we're a pretty large firm. We serve a lot of governments. It's actually, that says 600, it's now up to about 650 governments that we serve all across the Southeast. We serve a lot of large ones like yourself, you know, like the Savannah down the road, Augusta, Georgia, Columbus, Georgia, Tuscaloosa, places like that that are similar in size and nature to Charleston. A lot of large counties such as Greenville County up there in Greenville, South Carolina. Again, you can see the list. I don't need to read it out to you, but we have a lot of experience in doing this. As far as the audit itself, again, you heard me make note of the fact that you have a clean audit. Your financial statements, we were able to give you what we call an unmodified opinion. That's what you want to hear from someone like me, is we didn't have to modify our report in any way. It's clean. That's what you want to go home with. So if I'm in your shoes, that may be the number one thing to know today. It's good. You had under the single audit, which is the federal requirement, if you have certain grants above $750,000, you have to have special audits of certain grants. In your case, you all had about 13.1 million of federal programs this past year. And that certainly was more than 750. And we had to look at 3 of your major programs, your entitlement grants cluster, your COVID, the ARPA money, and the hospital preparedness program. Those 3 added up to about $7.5 million. So it was pretty big numbers that we were able to audit and get plenty of coverage by looking at those 3. And I'm able to tell you clean opinion on that. When I say that, I'm talking about we have to look and see if you were complied with all those federal grant requirements, and they change every day. It's very difficult to understand what you just inherited when you get one of these grants, because the rules of the game just constantly are evolving. But you ought to go through it and be able to teach each step of the way and do it like you're supposed to, dot the I's, cross the T's. That's hats off to you as a community, and that's great news. As far as this document that we're talking about, the annual comprehensive financial report, again, you've been doing this for years. We prepare it with the city and we work together to make this thing happen. And again, you got the certificate from the GFOA which is a very large trade organization of governmental entities. I think it's upwards of 20,000 entities are included in this trade association, but not all of them participate in the program. You all are one of those governments that does participate, and you've been noted as getting the certificate for several years. All right, getting to the numbers, the heart and soul of it all. If you didn't know it, you're a pretty large government. I think you probably already know that. You're upwards of about 1.8 billion that you've got in assets. That is not all cash. I want to make that very clear. That is not all cash. It's about 1.25 billion of that is in your hard assets, your buildings, your equipment, your infrastructure, all those things that you see as you ride down the road here. You can feel it and see it. You've also got about $600 million worth of liabilities. Of that 600 million, about 550 million of that is long-term, meaning about 50 million is short-term. When I say short-term, we're talking about accrued salaries, some accounts payable, contractor, vendor invoices that are coming in, things like that that have to be turned around and paid. So a great deal of your liabilities are very long-term in nature. You've got about 1.18 billion in equity. Again, would you not like to have this balance sheet yourself? This is a very strong looking balance sheet. Y'all have done very well. You've done very well just in the last 5 years or so too. I'll get to that in a few minutes, but it's been a very good period of time. When you look at everything, and this is what this balance sheet is talking about, when you look at everything, you go to the income statement, you had about $423 million worth of revenues. I'm talking about all your different funds, not just the general fund, not just the drainage fund, not just parking, everything. If you roll it all up, it was about 423. You had 273 million in expenses with about $150 million bottom line. Now, before anyone says, well, that's a little high, why would we want to have 150 million bottom line? With that 150 million, guess what you did with it? You spent about 120 million on infrastructure, on your capital assets. It's kind of like having a house. You might have your income tax returns you file, but if you got to put a new roof on, that doesn't get deducted, does it? Okay, the same thing's true here. These assets that you've invested in for 120 million, you aren't expensing those. Additionally, when you pay debt, you don't get to deduct that either, do you? When you pay debt on something, well, you paid about 40 million of debt this past year. So you had 120 and 40 million for a total of 160 just in paying debt principal and investing in your infrastructure and all of your assets. Consequently, do you need to have a bottom line like this? The absolute answer is yes. Okay. So it's very important people understand that. Looking at the general fund, it's had a healthy year. It's had several healthy years. It's been rather impressive to see what you all have been able to do. Your general fund has about 143 million of assets. That does not include hard assets. That is cash, that's investments, that's receivables, that's inventories, things like that. You've got about 27 million of total liabilities. Those things are currently due. Those things that you're going to have to be paid in the first couple of months of the new year. It gave you a fund balance of 116, which actually gave you about 7 months worth of coverage, of which unassigned was about 56 million and about 3.5 months of coverage. Now, again, for the person out there that might say, why do we need so much fund balance? When do you collect property taxes? When? Latter half of the year. So this is your fattest time of year is my point. You should look this good at the end of a 12/31 picture, because that's all this is a picture in time. You need to look strong at 12/31, and you do look strong at 12/31, because what you have to do now is go through the rest of the year, taking those monies that you took in during the fall, along with a few other monthly revenues that come in, but you have to have the ability and the capacity to go forward and cover the cost of the year, which they come every day. And so you've got to have this kind of strength, and you do. That's a great place to be. This is 12/31. You've just gotten paid all those property taxes, and you're sitting there at the fattest time of year. If this was a 9/30 year end, a September 30th, you'd probably look very different. Fair statement, Amy? Okay. So again, but this is your year end. And so we're taking a picture at your fattest time. So it's important people to get that. Looking at the revenues, you took in about 211 million and you spent about 196. Your fund balance grew. And again, you have to do that if you're going to continue to invest in yourself. Okay. I cannot stress that enough. Looking at the general fund revenues, we were just talking about property taxes. Look at that big giant green slice. That's your property taxes. Most of that is going to be that seasonal revenue, not all of it. Most of that is seasonal property tax revenue that comes in the fall. But then you have other revenue streams coming in too. But again, my point for this slide is to just make point about how important property taxes are to any government, and your government is one of those. Another graph I've got looks at the expenditures. Look at that big green slice. That is public safety. That is your fire, police, and all those kind of things that get captured under the concept of public safety. That's exactly where I expect it to be. A large urban government, usually about half their expenses are in the area of public safety. So you're right there. Exactly where I would expect you to be. You heard me talk about the last 5 years. What this graph and the one that follows it tries to do is to walk you through a picture looking back in time. The green bars are your revenue streams in the general fund. The red bars are your expenses. And notice how the green bar every year is a little bit more than the red bar. Y'all see that? And you notice also it was an all-time high in 2020 during the year of COVID, and then it came back down in 21 to more like 19 kind of numbers. So all this looks really good. And every year you're showing a layer of growth in fund balance. If you were stagnant as a community and you had no growth going on and nobody needed anything, we wouldn't have to be talking about fund balance growing. I think that's the opposite here. Just being here for the last 4 days and just riding around, you can see and feel the demand for these services and for the growth. This is another graph that shows you the same thing we just saw. If you look at those years there, in 17, you grew your fund balance to 3.8, then you grew it by 12.8, you grew it by 15.5. COVID hit, you grew it by 9.1, and this past year, you grew it by 14.7. You've had 5 tremendously great years to put you in a position to be able to go out there and do just about any initiative that you all need to or want to do. Not every community across this country can say that. I can tell you as a guy that does this everywhere, that's all I do is work with local governments. This is a beautiful picture right here. And this takes a lot of effort to make this happen. One thing I want to mention on the general fund that I think is important is, and this starts at the top, the tone at the top and it trickles down through management, is look at your budget to actual this past year. Your general fund took in about $7.5 million more in revenue than budgeted. That's a good thing. And it spent $17.5 million less than budgeted. That's a good thing. So a lot of good things are happening here. You know, if I'm sitting here from the objective third-party viewpoint, I like what I'm seeing. Okay. Please. I'm sure a good part of it is, yes. That is a problem everywhere, even at Waffle House. Yes, sir. That is a problem everywhere we look. It is definitely, I agree with you. I'm not going to sit here and disagree at all because you're exactly right. That is a part of it. But it does put you in a better position to be able to go out there, attract the right kind of talent, and still go forward with your initiatives. And I still think that's a great thing. I really do. But you're absolutely correct. This graph tries to show you a relationship that I think is important for people to understand about fund balance. And again, this is looking at 12/31. The blue line down there, that's your fund balance. The red line is your expenditures. Okay. You had expenditures this year of about 193.8. That's that far right top number on that graph. It came down from the COVID year of 203. Everybody see that? But your fund balance growth from 101 to 115,980 causes us to get a little narrow right there. And the narrowing of that gap is a good thing. What that says to me is you have financial strength. You grew your financial strength of the year. You've got a greater coverage. Your fund balance has a greater coverage of expenditures. You've got about 215 days, meaning I'm telling you, if you shut the faucet off on January 1st, you could go for 215 days and still pay your expenditures. Now, fortunately, you still have the fall that would come out and rescue you to the rest of the year, but you're in a great place to be able to continue to be strong with your initiatives. I think about all the governments that I go to that sometimes will say, well, we're going to have to put a stop to that project until the revenues come in and we'll start it back up. And then we got to put a stop to it again. I don't see that happening here. And that's a great thing. All right, looking at some other funds, I'm going to run through just a few. Your capital improvement fund is where you do a lot of your capital outlay expenditures out of. It's looking good. It's got a fund balance of about 19 million. That's at 22 in assets, minus 3 in liabilities. This past year, it took in 26 and spent 28. So it utilized some of that fund balance. It was at 21 million. It came down to 19. No harm, no foul. That's what it's designed to do. Your King Street Gateway TIF fund has about 58 million in assets, only about $1 million in liabilities with a fund balance of 57 million, about 9 million in revenues this past year, 4 million in expenditures, and an increase in your fund balance. Again, that fund's building up the reserves to do all the things that you are planning on doing. Excuse me? I didn't hear the question. Okay. Yeah. The drainage fund, the stormwater fund that you've got here is also sitting at about 53 million in fund balance. That increased this past year by 3 million because you took in 70, you spent 67. So again, it has a very strong fund balance as well. You get the theme here. I'm looking at some of your funds, your capital improvements, and your drainage fund, and these other ones, they all have a good fund balance and they're all ready to invest in your facilities, infrastructure, and all your projects. That's great. Daniel Island, we had a fund deficit this past year, 5 million. The fund balance went down by 4 million. That was a timing difference where you had to incur the expense in 1 year and the revenues are coming in 22. So I don't want anyone to get caught off guard with that. This is not a big deal, but it's just a timing of when the revenues are going to be recognized. They're being recognized as we speak, and it will offset it, and you should be in a great place at the close of 22. You've got a bunch of other funds that I'm not going to talk about because you have a lot of funds, as you know, but they're all in good health. When you look across the board, about 177 million of fund balance, about a $30 million increase in your funds this past year. Again, same theme. Your parking facilities is a big part of what you have here. You've ever parked in downtown Charleston? It's a big part. I've been parking around here the last few days. It's quite a task sometimes, but I'm glad you do have the parking facilities that you've got. The county has as well. But you had about $17 million worth of operating cash flows at the bottom of that slide. Let me explain what I mean by that is. That is the difference in your cash that you took in and the cash that you spent for operations. You need that 17 million because you have these long-term debts to pay for. So you have to have parking facilities because you had to build them with debt, right? You had to build them with those kind of funds. You have to have some great operating cash flows. And guess what? You do. You're doing very well there. Your pension plans, as you and I discussed in the past, you have the SCRS and the PORS plans. And I've mentioned to y'all in the past about how those are not very well funded. This past year, we saw an increase of about 10% in that relationship. Meaning a year ago, you were 55% funded. That's that last number on that slide in green. You now ended up at 65.5. That's at 12/31/21. Has anybody looked at their own portfolio or their 401ks? It's probably not going to be the same thing this year because the market has done what? It's been going down. But right now, as of 12/31, we were in a good place, or we were in a better place. Let me say it that way. As far as other communications, we have given you all those deliverables that you have in front of you. One of the things we put out is we call it the auditor's discussion and analysis. That's just something we do that nobody else does, but it attempts to tell you everything that we think you need to know. It takes pretty much what I'm saying to you today and puts it into narrative. So between that and this PowerPoint presentation, I think you've got some good information to be able to read. If you don't want to read it all, just put it next to your bedside stand, read a few pages, you'll be out like a light. You already did that? Did it work? Okay, there you go. And that does it for me. I wanted to again just thank you for having me here today, and I'm here to answer any questions should you have any. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it was slide 3, the unassigned on the fund balance that was in red. What is that?
Unassigned, when you have fund balance, the standards in financial reporting for governments require you to note if some of it is already committed, if it's restricted, or is it basically available to anything? And that's what the unassigned means. So you have about 3.5 months of free and clear unassigned fund balance in the general fund. Good question.
Questions for Mr. Edwards?
And maybe Amy can answer this as well, but on your slide with our pension, are we still have a liability with the state?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and what is that balance we owe?
You have about a $500 million, that middle bottom number. You have about $500 million in liabilities. You've got funds of 334 that are next to it to the left, giving you a liability of 169. That's your net liability that you still owe. And you're not in control of it. That's the thing. It's a very unfair number to have on your statements because you have no say in this.
Yeah, I know.
So, and that's across the entire state of South Carolina.
So what is the long-term or the short-term outlook for that? And that's going to stay in our books for a while, isn't it?
It's going to be on your books for a while. It's going to take a real endeavor by all the local governments in the state to bring that up to a more reasonable level. Places that I go when they have their own standalone pension plans, you know, other cities and counties that may have their own without going through these sources, they're in a good place if they're like 85% funded. That's a great place to be. Y'all are across the board at 55 and 65 respectively for the 2 years. That's low compared to what a well-funded pension plan is. And so at some point in our lifetime, the state's going to have to figure this thing out, and it's going to require local governments to play another financial role.
And all this was caused by something out of our control to begin with.
Totally. Totally. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor.
Miller, thank you for the report. It certainly seems very positive, and that seems a little ironic or contrary to the experience we've had over the last couple of years with COVID. There were disruptions to
Yes, sir.
certain parts of our income stream, and I think it's a testament to council and particularly to our staff that we responded as quickly as we did to anticipate that loss of revenue and make appropriate changes. So I commend our council, but mostly it's a reflection, I think, of the good work of Amy and Matt and our budget and finance department. They've just
I would concur.
been really remarkable. So, but just to put it out there, is there anything you got for us that you would recommend other than keep on keeping on
I
like
say
we're
keep
doing?
on keeping on like you're saying right there. I mean,
Right.
again, you're one of the more impressive governments that we serve, and we serve a lot of large ones. And the last few years, y'all have gone through COVID and all the other challenges of life beautifully.
Yep.
And that tone starts at the top, and it's good that management has worked with that tone and done everything they should do. And you've got a good team going right now between all of you all in this room. It's really going well.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Does anybody else have any questions for Miller before he sits down? All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. It was very helpful.
Mr. Chairman, do we need a motion to accept these reports as information or to approve them in any way?
I am being told through a very vigorous nod that it appears this is for information only.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is any other business. Does anybody have any other business to bring before the audit committee? Motion to adjourn, properly seconded with consent, everybody?
Aye.
All right, good deal. Thanks.